Hi, 7th graders. My name is Melissa Checkett, and I teach medical forensics. And I'm going to share with you a brief little mini lesson about fingerprints today. And in hopes that when you get to high school, you'll remember this little mini lesson and how fun it was and think, I want to take medical forensics. You can take medical forensics in high school your 11th or 12th grade year. So you're going to have to remember this until you register when you're in 10th grade that this is a class you want to take. But it's a super fun class. It's all about forensic science and using evidence that you find at a crime scene to be able to help you solve a crime. So we talk about crime scene investigation. We talk about fingerprints, obviously, blood spatter, and how you can use blood to figure out what happened. We talk about death investigations, drugs, and testing different kinds of drugs to figure out what they are. We talk about DNA, bones found at crime scene, trying to figure out how the person died. You can actually, from people's bones, tell if they're male or female and how tall they were. All of those things we talk about. So if that kind of stuff interests you, this would be an awesome class for you to be able to take. It counts as a science credit. So instead of taking, you have to take 3 years of science when you get to high school, and this counts as a third year of science. So instead of having to take like chemistry or physics or something like that, this is a fun way to get one of your science credits done. So today we're going to talk about fingerprints. Why do we have fingerprints? Turn and talk to your neighbor for 1 minute and come up with a couple of reasons why you think we have fingerprints. All right, what were some answers that you came up with? How many of you guys said helps to improve grip when grabbing things? Some people feel like when you're picking up objects that having those fingerprints or those ridges on there gives you a little more grip. It's a good theory, one that's not really provable because most people have fingerprints, and so all people actually do. So it's hard to test whether or not that's true. How many of you help improve our touch senses? It gives you a little more sensation. So it helps improve our touches when we touch things, gives us more sensation. Again, hard to prove whether it does or it doesn't because everybody has fingerprints, and when you get rid of your fingerprints, it actually does a lot of damage. So how many of you put helps identify people? This is the main reason that we can figure out why we actually have fingerprints. Every single finger is unique. This finger is going to be different than this finger. This finger is going to be different than my thumb. So none of this fingerprint on my thumb, nobody else in this world has the same exact fingerprint as my thumb. So it becomes a unique identifier to me. What somebody looks like can change over time, but your fingerprints won't ever change. When you were born in the hospital, your parents probably got a copy of your footprints. They're not real great quality footprints, but if they had even done your fingerprints at the time, your fingerprints would remain the same as they are today. They just get bigger. So we can use that information to be able to help us identify criminals with fingerprints that are left behind at crime scenes. They can be matched to the person that committed the crime. So fingerprints have 3 patterns: loops, whorls, and arches. This is what starts to make fingerprints unique. This isn't the main thing that makes them unique. It just starts to help us classify them into 3 different categories. The first category is a loop. If you want to kind of look at your fingerprints for a minute to figure out whether or not you have loops while I talk. Loops are these ridges, which if you look at your fingers, everyone's going to see these little lines in your fingers. They're called ridges. It's friction ridge skin. And that creates the pattern. But loops flow in one side. They make this loop around and flow out the other side. They have this little thing here called a delta. And this is where the fingerprint changes direction. This part loops and this just kind of flows up and over. And then you have these ridges here. 60% of you are going to have loops. So the majority of you will find a loop on your finger. And you're looking for this little section here, the delta, and it to flow in and out right here. So if it flows in the left and out the left, it's a left loop. In the right and out the right, it's a right. So how many of you have loops by show of hand? How many of you looked down and were able to see loops? The majority of you should be able to. The next category is whorls, and what you're looking for to see whether or not you have a whorl is the ridges flow in this circular pattern. You have a core or a center here, and they just make a circular motion around. You can see that in both of them. 30% of the population, 30 to 35% of the population has whorls. So a lot of you are going to have whorls as well. So if you've been looking at your fingerprints, how many of you see that you have a whorl? A lot of you should. My 2 thumbs are actually whorls, and then the 4 fingers are all loops. And everybody's going to be a little bit different. What I don't have is any arches, and this is only 5% of the population have arches. So most of you are not going to find an arch. And arches are pretty much just flowing ridges across your finger. This is called a plain ridge or a plain arch. It flows in one way and just kind of goes out the other. This one's called a tinted arch. It kind of has this tent pole up the middle, and the ridges flow up and over it. A lot of people confuse this one with a loop, but there's no loop back or recurve on this. It's actually an arch. A lot of people, like I said, confuse it with loops. So if you think you have an arch, more than likely it is a loop. In my time working, part of one of my activities is we actually fingerprint everybody. And I've had one student that she had all 10 of her fingers arches. Very unique, and I've never seen that because, like I said, very, very few people actually have an arch. So now we've got our fingerprints categorized into those 3 categories: loop, whorl, arch. But again, that doesn't make it unique. What makes it unique is each ridge characteristic. It's called minutia. And no one has the same exact ridge characteristics in the same location as another person. So we start looking at the characteristic of that ridge. There's 2 characteristics we look at. One's called a bifurcation. It's when the ridge is going along and it bifurcates into 2 ridges right here. So it forks, it forms 2 ridges. One becomes 2. The other is called a ridge ending, and that's when the ridge or the line just suddenly ends, or it stops being a ridge. So you can see in this fingerprint lots of bifurcations all over here. Then you've got some ridge endings here. So when you're trying to figure out if the fingerprint matches somebody else, you're going to start comparing the minutia or their ridge characteristics to another individual. And it's just a matching game, whether or not the 2 fingerprints match in the same location. Here's a ridge ending bifurcation. So what you would do is in the fingerprint, you would look at one certain area. whether that be the center of it, the side of it, whatever it might be, whatever portion of the finger you have. And you find the same location in the other fingerprint. And then you start counting ridges. So here we'll call this one John's fingerprint. And this is the fingerprint found at the crime scene. And we're going to try and figure out whether or not they match. So this first ridge up here bifurcates. Look down at this one, bifurcation. Come back up to John's fingerprint. After the bifurcation, we have another bifurcation going the other way. Look down here. Oh, same thing happens. Come back up to the top. We count 1, 2, 3 full ridges, and we have this short little ridge here, right? We have a ridge ending here and a ridge ending here. Come down from this bifurcation. 1, 2, 3. There's that short ridge. Okay, we come back up here. We have 1, 2, 3 full ridges, and then that ridge ending. 1, 2, 3 full ridges, ridge ending. Full ridge, bifurcation, full ridge, bifurcation, full ridge, ridge ending, full ridge, ridge ending. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 unique ridge characteristics, and they match exactly down here. That is almost enough. You need about 8 to 10 ridge characteristics to be able to say, yes, this fingerprint is so unique that nobody else can have the same exact fingerprint. The next one I want you to do on your own. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Should give you long enough to match these ridge characteristics up to figure out whether or not this is a match. All right, how many of you think that this fingerprint matches? Okay, how many of you think it's not a match? All right, those of you who said it's not a match, you guys are correct. Everything lines up except for, here's you got that short ridge, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges, and then the bifurcation. Over here you have 1, 2 ridges and the bifurcation. This is called an enclosure where it's 2 bifurcations. This short ridge, this ridge ending, this short ridge, this bifurcation. Everything matches up exactly except for there's extra ridges over in this one. Those extra ridges is enough for you to say, nope, this is not a match. This is not the same person at all. And you would stop what you're doing and you wouldn't even look further at the fingerprint because you cannot justify these 2 extra ridges being there. So when we go to court, right, you have to make these big displays so that the jury can look at it and say, yes, I understand that this is what's happening. We give the jury actually little mini lessons like I'm giving you, so that they can see, yep, I can see that number 8 is a ridge ending and it matches this number 8. And this number 7 is a ridge ending and it matches this number 7. Because the jury is the one that ultimately decides the fate of the individual. We can give this evidence to the fingerprint comparison to the detectives and they can go make an arrest, but it might still come down to a jury decide, yes, that fingerprint information is the same, makes it the same individual. So you can see 6 and 5, that short ridge. But you can see others on here that aren't labeled, but they still match. You can see in the middle, here's a ridge ending, here's a ridge ending, here's one over here on this side that matches this one, right? There's still lots of minutiae, different ridge characteristics that aren't pointed out. This just happens to be 10 of them. Each fingerprint has about 250 different ridge characteristics in them, so it's a lot. It makes them unique. So fingerprints that are left behind at crime scenes, most of them are invisible. You can't see them with your eyes just by looking at them. And that's called a latent fingerprint. And latent fingerprints are formed by oil, sweat, and dirt that's on your hands. And then when you touch something, it's left behind on that object. Think about like touching a glass door. And when you touch it, you can actually kind of see fingerprints left behind. I have 2 big sliding glass doors and my little boys touch them all the time and I can see fingerprints. I can't see any detail on that minutia or anything with my eyes. They have to be enhanced using chemicals to be able to be seen. And the most common one that we use is fingerprint powder and a fingerprint brush. So this is a powder, it's just a black powder, and it adheres to the oil and sweat in your fingerprint. So you dust it across the surface and it leaves the black powder behind, and it helps you be able to visualize and see those fingerprints. And they're really easy to see. And then once they're on the object, you need to be able to keep the object forever. We're going to actually do a little activity that you guys are going to touch soda cans and dust them for fingerprints. But once you get your fingerprint, what do you do with it then, right? How are you going to compare that to a suspect? So what they actually do is they'll use tape, and here's my tape. They don't actually use this kind of tape. They use fingerprint tape. It's a little more expensive, but this will work just great. And fingerprint cards, and you put the tape on it, and I'll show you how to do it all. And you're able to take the fingerprint with you. You take it back to a crime lab and run it through a computer system called AFIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System, to figure out who did it. It compares all the fingerprints of people that have ever been arrested and have ever had to been fingerprinted for a background check. So teachers, when they get their job, they have to have a background check done. And when they get their background check done, they get fingerprinted, and then their fingerprints actually get loaded into the system. So if teachers ever commit a burglary and leave their fingerprints behind at the crime scene, they'll get caught, even though they've never been arrested. Police officers, same thing. They have to get background check done, and so their fingerprints are in the system. So the computer system will bring back a list of suspects, possible suspects, that their fingerprints are close. And then the crime scene investigator has to go through and look at the minutia points and say, this is the fingerprint, that the booked inked one. This is the unknown one found at the crime scene. So the fingerprint expert will have to look and say, oh, yep, these do match up. All these minutia, yep, that is a match. That is the same person. And then they can give that information to a detective, and the detective can go and talk to the individual and ask them why their fingerprints were found at the crime scene and possibly arrest them for whatever the crime might be. So I'm going to show you how to dust a can for fingerprints. All right, so dusting for fingerprints. You're going to get a soda can, and everybody gets to dust a soda can to try and find fingerprints. This is a super messy activity. And to make it so your teachers don't get so mad at me for having you do this activity, please try your hardest not to make a huge mess. The fingerprint powder gets all over. Once you've dipped a brush, a little bit goes a long way. So before you dip your brush again in the powder, just try using it, and it should have enough on there to go quite a ways. So remember I said that fingerprints are made up of oil? The oilier the fingerprint, the better it's going to work. So touch your face, your forehead, the side of your nose, because most people have a little bit of oil, excess oil in these locations, and get a good greasy fingerprint so that you can leave a really good fingerprint on a can. And then just give it a good touch. Don't smudge your fingers or smear them. Once you've grabbed on, don't move it, and then let it go. I dipped this one a little last time, so I'm going to just see if it will have enough powder on it without having to dip it again. Then you're going to take your brush, and you're just going to lightly, oh yep, lots of powder left on it, brush around the can, and it's going to turn black everywhere there's fingerprints. You can't see the detail on it, but you can see there's finger marks all over it. So like I said, we want to be able to take those fingerprints with us. A lot of your cans are going to be black, like Mountain Dew cans, and like this is showing up black. It works really well on this Diet Dr. Pepper can. But even if you have a black can, this fingerprint powder kind of changes colors based on what you're dusting. So even if you have a black can, you're still going to be able to see your fingerprints. So take your tape, and if you were doing this in real life, you'd have gloves on. You don't want to get your fingerprints on the object you're dusting. You don't want to get your fingerprints on the tape, but obviously we're just doing this for fun. So you take a piece of tape and your fingerprints are going to get onto it. And you want to try and get an area where you've got the most fingerprints, which mine's right there. And you're going to secure the tape on one side and kind of push it down. And then you're going to slowly work from one side to the other. You don't want to crease your tape, and you don't want to get any bubbles in your tape because that will ruin your fingerprint. And once the tape's down, it actually removes the whole fingerprint. So if you messed this up and creased your tape and ruined the fingerprint, you pretty much just got one chance, because now you can see my can is clean and the fingerprints aren't there. They're actually on the tape. Can't really see it very well. Then you're just going to take a 3x5 card and same process. Secure it down on one side first. I didn't get this on there super straight. And then just kind of get all the creases out of it. I didn't do a very good job. I do have one small crease in my fingerprint, but anyways, here you can't see the great detail. You'll be able to see it in person when you look at it. You'll be able to see your minutia. This will be easier for you to tell, hey, look, here's a loop, here's a little whirl, and what your fingerprints actually are. So good luck. Clean up your mess. Wipe down your station. Speaking of wiping it down, there isn't enough cans for everybody. You're going to have to share your can and your fingerprint brush. So once you're done with it, take it and wash it completely down, and then give it to your friend to be able to wash. And then when everybody's done, wash it for the next class. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. Remember, when you get to 5th grade, you want to sign up for medical forensics.